Are we heading back? Are we heading over there now?
Yep, that's pretty much
Yeah, I
wraps
think-
up what you need to know here.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for everything.
Yep, well, if you need Ed to talk to, just contact me and I will arrange a meeting with you.
You got
All
it.
right.
Somebody call out the radio. You
Kermanovich?
guys are heading over there.
Yep, we are.
Awesome.
Thank you.
That was physical.
Brief
All right.
for me.
So that it'll be brief for me too, I hope.
Good luck.
Hello,
Thanks.
Protectron.
How'd it go up there, Kermanovich?
Seemed acceptable.
That's good.
I don't think anybody's like doomed to die anytime soon.
Right? Yeah, I'd hope not. Is
Testing
everyone else
too.
coming down soon?
If one of them calls over the radio, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I let them know over the radio that they're going up there.
Excellent.
Oh, I'm gonna sit down for now.
I'm really hoping people won't have to rely on me to provide medical, but I will be more than interested to learn things in case of emergency.
Yeah, hopefully not. In an ideal world, medics will be doing pretty much 90% of the work, but you know, there isn't always a medic there, or the medic might go down. Yeah, this is just basically enough to either keep someone alive until a medic gets there, or you know, nothing too intensive. It's pretty basic stuff.
Oh, this is interesting for.
Hey, Gordon.
Howdy.
You guys all done up there?
Well, they said started heading up this way.
Okay. Are you guys just coming down one at a time, or is everyone done and just kind of going through the motions?
I think they're talking to each other.
Ah, okay.
Here comes Rodriguez.
Hey, Rodriguez.
Hey.
Might wanna... Oh.
May I sit down?
Yeah,
Of course.
we're gonna do some first aid training soon.
Did you tell him, Cord, or no?
Tell him what?
Never mind.
What?
It's probably best to skip it.
Yeah.
I guess.
We'll
Okay.
probably read it in the medical notes.
Well, I think I'm going to play some Grognak in the meantime.
So there's a chance that the rain may have caused a problem with my vocoder, so I'm gonna participate as little and just listen.
Okay.
That's pretty
Vocoder sounds fine to me.
Hello. How are you? How are you doing today, sir?
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Indeed. I am a wandering trader. I trade in medical supplies. Would you like any?
Go in and ask Scribe Hunter.
I see you in there or somewhere else.
Hunter, you got a visitor.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Musket Man. I come from the fort, all the way at the top. Are you interested in any medical supplies or any drugs that I have acquired through my travels?
We are good on medical supplies, but thank you for offering.
But of course, I wander around all the time. If you need anything, I'm usually up here or I'm at my fort. So if you need anything, I'm up there.
I will keep that in mind, and I will pass the word to the others.
Thank you very much. You all have a nice day today.
You stay
You
safe.
too.
Be well.
Swear to God, my backpack is getting heavy.
You all heard that too, right? Called himself Musket Man.
My brother
yeah.
calls himself
I love him.
Ronan. It's not unusual.
You know what? Fair. Holy shit.
It's an honorable. He's an honorable man.
Reginald,
Yes.
did you have to be face to face with me?
Oh no, you were standing in the doorway.
Could
can't
have
answer
cleared
that.
your throat or something? You didn't have to.
Well, I didn't have the cough, so.
Alright.
I find stiletto heels handy for getting people's attention. I'll loan you some, Reggie.
What?
Never mind. I don't have any your size.
Please take a seat, Reggie.
Go ahead. Say that again? just got the last group that was with Hunt, right? Oh, yeah. They should be. Yeah. I'm being told they're at Hunters.
Where did Cord go?
I'm
Somebody
sure
say my name?
There
There
he
he
is.
is.
All right.
Oh, Dixie.
Are all of you guys the ones who were in the group up there, or were there more of you guys?
I believe this is
Austin
everybody.
was with us, but he took off.
Yeah. I believe this is most of us.
Okay, that's fine. We can go ahead and get started. We've been waiting long enough. All right. So, first aid. Any of you guys feel confident in first aid as it stands?
Negative.
Beyond a stim pack?
Alright.
No.
All right, cool. Well, you will after this. So, we're going to do this class in two different parts. We will go through the informational stuff, where I basically tell you the different procedures and how to do them. And then we will go into the second part, where we basically put it all together, and it'll start to make more sense when we go through it kind of as like a flow of how you do it. Don't feel afraid to ask any questions at any time. Just raise your hand. If I reach a good stopping point, I will call on you, and you can don't feel like it's a stupid question or anything like that. Ask, because now's the time to ask these things instead of when somebody's down out in the field and they're counting on you. Questions so far? All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So, some of the basic concepts of combat first aid. First thing you're always going to want to do if somebody goes down is call for a medic. Medics aren't always going to be there, but they will be a good amount of the time. And if somebody goes down, best way for them to get definitive care is for a medic to do it instead of one of you guys. Now, I can try to teach as much as I want to one of you guys, but it's never going to be as good as what a medic can do, just because there's such a big knowledge. So say that there's not a medic there, or a medic is far away and needs to come on their way there. First thing you can do is make sure that the area is safe. Alright? If it's not safe and you go to treat this guy, then you could get shot, you could go down, or you could have to abandon him because it's not safe. So, safety is the #1 thing, always. Because if you go down, you're not helping him, and you just made it worse for everyone else. You know, as bad as it sounds, if you're still getting shot at, you need to just let them lay there. Because, you know, that threat needs taken care of first. I know it sounds bad, but that's how it's got to be. You know, don't go out there playing hero, because that's how we get even more people coming back in body bags.
Roger that.
So whenever you go up to a casualty, thing to keep in mind are ABC. ABC, just like the alphabet. Airway, breathing, and circulation. Those are the 3 keys to life. So you guys know how you can survive for about 2 weeks without food, about 2 days without water? Well, you can only survive for about 2 minutes without air or blood pumping through your body. So keep that in mind. ABC. Those are the 3 keys to life. Now, depending on what kind of state the casualty is in, that might get modified a little bit. It might be CAB. So you go circulation, airway, breathing. And the reason why you would do that is because if somebody has a major bleed and they're losing all the blood in their body, it doesn't matter if they're breathing or not, because they're not going to have blood in their body to carry that oxygen. So it might come down to, depending on how they are, you need to control any major bleeding before you start worrying about whether they're bleeding. Getting a general impression. Basically what that is when you come up to a casualty, you're going to get your general impression, which it sounds like it's more complicated than it is, but it's exactly what it sounds like. You know, when you come up on them, you're going to see what they look like, you know, whether their skin's blue, whether they're bleeding, how they're laying down, what their injury is. You're going to see this stuff when you come up to them, and that general impression is going to kind of guide how you need to approach the situation. Checking for a pulse. Everyone here know how to check for a carotid pulse?
Negative.
Okay,
Carotid?
so yeah, carotid pulse. So you basically feel the carotid artery in your neck. So everyone right now, place your index and your middle finger on your throat and feel about an inch to the left or right of it, depending on which finger you're using, and feel for your pulse there. Everyone feel your own carotid pulse, so that way you know where that is.
Oh, weird. Yes.
Yeah, so whenever you're feeling that pulse on someone, careful not to depress too hard because that could stem the flow of blood to their brain. And then same thing for yourself right now. Don't push down too hard on that. And then also the other side of it is if you push down too hard, you're not going to be able to feel that pulse either. That's how you check for a carotid pulse. If you're trying to check if someone's heart is beating, always check that. Don't check their wrist, don't check their foot, don't check their leg, don't check their arm. Check for their carotid pulse. That's where it's going to be most strong at. So once you find out what their carotid pulse is, whether they have a carotid pulse, you need to control their airway. So there are a couple ways to control someone's airway. There's the head tilt chin lift and then the jaw thrust maneuver. Difference between, so they both work to the same effect. They both pull someone's jaw forward and pull their tongue away from their throat so they don't choke on their own tongue. The most common airway obstruction in someone who's unconscious is their own tongue. So the difference between the jaw thrust and the head tilt chin lift is with the jaw thrust, what you would do is you'd basically use your fingers to lift their jaw upwards, their lower jaw. And you would do this so it pushes their jaw away and pulls their tongue with it and it keeps it out of their throat. Head tilt chin lift is basically exactly what it sounds like. Tilt their head backwards and point their chin upwards, and this is while they're laying on their back. The different situations you would want to use them, you would want to use a jaw thrust when you suspect that there might be a spinal injury. And the reason for that is because you don't have to move their head to do a jaw thrust. Head tilt chin lift, you do have to move their head. And if they have a spinal injury, that could paralyze them moving their head around. Head tilt chin lift is easier to do and it's kind of more effective. It doesn't take two hands dedicated to doing it all the time. But like I said, you always have that piece of you might have to be worried about there being a spinal injury. So something you would have to be worried about a spinal injury, if they're caught in an explosion, if they fell a high distance, if they took a significant back injury or head injury. Those would be situations where you could suspect a spinal injury, and you should try to avoid doing head. When you check their airway and open it up, open their mouth, look inside, see if they have any secretions like vomit or blood or anything like that in their mouth. If they do, then you're going to need to get them on their side, open their mouth and tilt their head down and try to drain as much of that out as you can before you try to maintain control of their airway. Because if you open someone's airway up and it's filled with blood and vomit, that's not going to let air go through whether their airway is open or not. They've got an obstruction. And there might even be foreign body obstructions. There could be dirt in there, rocks, debris, you know. A lot of stuff gets thrown around in explosions. Their own teeth. You can run into a multitude of things. But that A part of ABC, that airway, is extremely important. Because if their airway's not open, they're not going to be pulling air in and breathing. So how to deliver rescue breaths. So basically what a rescue breath is you breathe into their mouth and the air that you exhale is actually about 41% or so oxygen. And that's enough for their body to perfuse that oxygen and get it delivered through their system. So how to perform a rescue breath, you basically just cup your hands and lips around their lips as tightly as you can. You want a really good seal. And then you just blow down into their mouth. It's pretty simple. If you are trying to deliver rescue breaths, make sure that you're watching their chest. Look for their chest rising and falling as you push the air into their lungs. If their chest doesn't rise or fall, then you got a seal issue. You need to try to readjust their airway. Try to make sure their airway is open. Readjust your seal around their mouth. Because there's an issue going wrong there for why they're not getting that air into their lungs at that point. So like I was talking about, putting them on their side and tilting their head down, that's called a recovery position. You would do that typically for someone who's conscious, or typically for someone who's unconscious, but has a pulse and is breathing. You just want to put them into that position to make sure that if they start vomiting or they start bleeding from their mouth or something, it drains out and they don't just choke to death on it. It also kind of helps keep their own airway clear from their tongue, because then that gravity is just pulling the tongue downwards and away from their throat. Any questions so far?
Negative.
All right. So, next thing in ABC, circulation. So circulation is two things. It's bleeding and chest compressions. So we'll start off talking about chest compressions. So everyone feel your own chest right now. Do you feel your that hard bone where your ribs come together, that hard bone in the middle that's like a column, goes up and down? That's called your sternum. Everyone feel your own sternum?
Yeah.
Okay, so at about the middle point in that sternum, that's where you want to perform compressions on someone. You don't want to go higher than that, you don't want to go lower than that. Right there in the middle of the sternum. That's because the heart is right behind there and the lungs are right behind there, and it gets all that pushing up and down and pumping the way it needs to. Go lower or higher, you're going to hurt them and you're not going to be delivering good CPR. When you do chest compressions, you need to lock your hands together with the heel of one hand down on the middle of that sternum, and then you push down with both hands. When you push down, you need to make sure that you're pushing down at a depth of about 2 inches. If you're not going down about 2 inches when you push down on their chest, you're not pushing their chest hard enough and you're not making the heart pump adequately. You might have to push really hard, it depends. Some people are heavier set, some people are more muscular, so you got to push a lot harder. It's very hard to do CPR. You will get exhausted quickly, like 30 seconds to a minute. It doesn't take very long. It's.
What if we injure them?
You might be doing CPR and people's ribs can break. That's fine. It happens a lot, actually. And that's just how it is. You know, they're not going to die from a broken rib, but they're going to die if their heart's not beating. Make sense?
It's a fair point.
Yes, good question, Cord.
Yeah, you're gonna feel things moving around the way a weird way, and you might feel stuff breaking while you're doing CPR, but it happens. That's a consequence of CPR, and it's a necessary consequence. You know, that broken rib could cause issues later, but the immediate warning right now is that their heart is not beating, and that's what needs to.
So, are you supposed to break their ribs?
I mean, yes and no. It just happens while you're doing CPR. It's not that you're supposed to or you're not supposed to. It just happens and you can't control it.
Okay.
Yeah. Push as hard as you need to push down those 2 inches. If their ribs start breaking while you're pushing down to get that 2-inch depth, then so be it. But that 2-inch depth is very important. So now we're going to put rescue breaths and chest compressions together. So when you do chest compressions, I forgot to mention this, you're going to want to do it at a rate of about 100 to 120 per minute. So when you compress someone's chest doing chest compressions, it's going to go at about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like it's pretty fast, and you need to keep up with that because that's how fast that their heart is going to need to beat to maintain that pressure inside of their blood vessels. So now putting rescue breaths and chest compressions together. You're going to want to do it at about a ratio of 30 compressions to 2 breaths. So every 30 compressions, you're going to want to perform 2 rescue breaths on them. And when you go to perform those rescue breaths after 30 compressions, take no longer than 10 seconds to attempt it. If you go to perform rescue breaths and you can't get those 2 breaths in and it's been about 10 seconds, don't worry about it. Go back to doing compressions because maintaining that pressure inside of their blood vessels and vasculatory system is very important because that pressure loses very quickly. Just in that 10 seconds of stopping the compressions, they lose about 75% of the pressure that you just built up inside of their bloodstream. So you don't want to get hung up on doing rescue breaths. They already kind of will passively ventilate while you're doing the compressions just from the natural movement of their lungs getting pushed up and down. So the rescue breaths, I'm telling you, don't get hung up on them. And you might be in a situation where you can't really do it. Like if they have major facial trauma and you can't get a good seal around their mouth, then, you know, so be it. Just do the compressions. That's the most important part of it. So next we will talk about bleeding control then. I assume everybody here knows how to dress a wound? No?
Isn't
Okay.
it-
I have an idea, but nothing medically taught.
What is
I
it?
always thought it was supposed to be pressure, right?
So yeah, there's a few different factors to bleeding control. So first thing that you can do to help stop bleeding is put direct pressure on it. Push down pretty much as hard as you can without, you know, hurting someone. So like an example of that would be if they're bleeding majorly on a fractured limb. Obviously you don't want to push down super hard and make that fracture worse. But if you know there's no fracture, push down on that sucker as hard as you can to stop that bleeding. Try to put a dressing in between your hand and them. It's going to be a lot more effective when it's soaking up that blood, and it's kind of helping it clot. And once you push that dressing on there as hard as you can, get a secondary bandage, or even like duct tape or medical tape, whatever you got, and wrap that dressing around, or wrap it around that dressing to hold that dressing tightly against the wound, and then that can kind of take over on applying pressure to the wound for you. If you apply pressure to that wound and that wound doesn't stop bleeding or slow bleeding within a couple of minutes, you're going to want to move to putting a tourniquet on at that point. You guys know what a tourniquet is? The last group didn't.
Not I.
Okay, so a tourniquet, is... Yeah, it could be something professionally made just for it, or it could be something improvised. Basically what you're doing is you are tying off the limb further up towards the middle of the body to stop the blood from flowing down that limb towards the wound, basically. Like, it could be anything from a professionally made tourniquet to a belt that you tie around. It could be anything, you know? You might have to get creative sometimes if you either don't have a tourniquet or yours broke, whatever's going on. But tourniquets are very effective for stopping that bleeding. It's kind of dangerous though, you gotta be careful, because if you leave that tourniquet on for too long, they could lose that limb since it's been so constricted on having blood for so long while the tissue dies. But it's kind of a consequence you might have to weigh sometimes if that tourniquet is gonna have to be on there for a while. You know, hey, it'd suck if someone had to lose a leg, but guess what? They didn't bleed to death, and that's always more important, is that they lived. You know, no matter what you gotta do to get someone home alive, that's what matters. You know, like I was talking earlier about spinal injuries. If you injure their spine and they're paralyzed, hey man, that's a lot better than being dead. At least as far as, like, you know, people could have personal opinions on that, but as far as medical stuff goes, it's always better to consider a patient alive than dead, no matter what. So whatever you got to do. So to tie a tourniquet off, you're basically going to want to tie it down onto their limb as hard as or as tightly as you can. Never tourniquet on someone's chest or neck. Don't ever fucking do that. Only tourniquet on an arm or a leg. And when you tie something down as a tourniquet, make sure that you can't slip your fingers under it. If you can slip your fingers under it without trying very hard at all, then that thing is not tight enough and you need to get it tighter. All right, you guys kind of understand what a tourniquet is now?
Yeah, I get the idea.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, next big thing with bleeding control is shock. So what shock is a exaggerated response by the body to try to compensate for the loss of perfusion. That could be anything from the body just not able to pump blood that's in it properly enough, so cells are not getting the proper oxygenation they need, or it could be that there's been a major loss of blood in the body and that blood is no longer there to supply that oxygen to the cells. And shock is a response from the body in an attempt to correct that. But when it reaches a certain point called decompensated shock, it's really bad for the body and it will kill someone. Best way to spot shock is people who are going into shock will typically have very gray, ashen, bluish skin. Most reliable way to check someone for whether they're adequately perfusing blood and oxygen is to look at their fingernails. Because, you know, people are of different skin color. Somebody who's a darker skin tone, it might be a little harder to tell whether their skin is pale, obviously. So the best thing to do is look at their fingernails. You'll immediately tell whether their skin is gray, blue, ashen, kind of pale. Everyone is pink at the fingernails. Normally, if everything is going good. Other signs you might see, if they're conscious and they might be starting to be going to shock, they'll have a feeling of anxiety, impending doom. They'll feel lightheaded, like they're gonna pass out. If somebody tells you that they feel like they're gonna die, chances are they're probably gonna be dead pretty soon. Like people don't just say that, and that is a major sign of shock if they say that they feel like they're gonna die. Unfortunately, there isn't really, or another sign of shock setting in is they might pass out, or they might start going into a lower level of consciousness. So they might start showing signs of confusion, kind of acting a little crazy out there, like their brain isn't getting enough oxygen to continue to function correctly, and start to go crazy or pass out. Unfortunately, there isn't really a whole lot that you as non-medics can do for shock. Best things that you can do for shock is to lay them on their back, elevate their legs, and try to keep them warm and comfort them. Like, you know, don't. I'll say this now: don't ever tell anyone it's going to be okay if it's not. You know, don't give them false hope. Just be honest with them. Tell them how bad it is, and don't try to freak them out. Though someone asks you if they're going to die, tell them that you're going to do everything you can in your power to make sure that doesn't happen. But don't sit there and flat out tell them, no, you're not going to die, you're going to be fine. Because I've heard people say that, and then patient's dead before and it's just awful when that. So laying them on their back while they're going into shock, that kind of helps the body pump blood around a little bit better, because it's not having to work as hard to pump that blood up to the vital organs. It's not working against gravity anymore. Elevating the legs helps, because that kind of, it reserves blood from going into the legs, so then there's more blood to go around in the rest of the body where the vital organs are. Legs aren't essential in terms of like needing blood. And again, only medics can give definitive treatment for shock. Even then, what medics can do is pretty limited. Best we can do is stick them with an IV, or if we have blood with us for whatever reason, give them blood. That's about all we can do. They need definitive treatment for shock. They need to get back to the hospital. So next thing is patient moving. There's a couple different ways that you guys as non-medics will move a patient. First one is extremity lift. What that basically is you'll have, so you'll position them on their back. You'll have one person stand between their legs and bend down, grab them by underneath their knees, lift them that way, and then the person at their head will grab them from underneath their armpits and lift them that way, and then you'll do that two-person extremity carry to wherever you need to go. The preferable way to carry them is if you have a portable stretcher, which everyone should know what a stretcher is. It's literally just a piece of cloth suspended between like two metal bars or sticks or whatever, and then you would obviously just put them on that piece of cloth and then carry them that way. Stretcher's a lot better because you can continue to perform CPR on somebody while you're carrying them like. So let's say if there is a medic there, after you call for them and they go to the casualty, best thing you can do for your medics is to keep the area secure. Don't try to help them unless they ask you for help. We love help as medics, but sometimes we don't need it, and it'll just get in the way of what we're trying to do. So, and safety is always more important than anything else. If it's only you and a medic there, and the medic needs help, he's still not going to ask you for help, because, again, personal safety and having the area secure is more important than anything. So, in terms of helping a medic out, if they ask you for help, they're going to tell you what they need you to do, and it's not going to be super complicated. They'll let you know right then. And this can, what I've said so far, can kind of help you understand what they're trying to get you to do. They might need to help you, or they might need you to help support their airways, hold their airway open, maybe do compressions, maybe give them rescue breaths while they do compressions. It just depends. It's always easier to do all of this with two people. So, before we move on to putting all of this together, any questions so far on any additional stuff?
Negative.
All right, so moving on to putting all this together into a flow. So, say you're, out on patrol. One of your brothers in front of you goes down right in front of you. First thing you need to be concerned of, scene safety. Is it safe to treat this person? Where is this threat? We need to take this threat out first before we start helping this person. Always keep that in the front of your mind. You shouldn't try to help somebody out if it's not safe. As bad as that sounds, if they fall down into cover, great. you know, you can get into cover and start helping them out. But if they're not in cover, that area needs to be completely secure before you start running out there into the open and trying to... It's kind of different for power armor, you know. Power armor could go out there and grab somebody who's down and pull them back. But typically you're going to want to worry about getting the area secure before doing that. And it should almost always be somebody who is not a medic getting that person back to cover. Because if the medic goes out there for that person, tries to get him back into cover, and then that medic gets shot, you're in some really deep shit because now your medic is down. And that's not good. For obvious reasons. So yeah, make sure it's safe. Once it's safe, and you start approaching this casualty, get your general impression. Look at them. Take note of their position and any visible injuries that they could have. If there's any severe bleeding, examples of severe bleeding and how to spot it are if blood is squirting out or if blood is pooling and pouring out about as fast as you can pour out a Nuka-Cola bottle. If it's coming out that fast or squirting out, then that's a major bleeding and you need to go CAB instead of ABC at that point. Because like I was saying, they don't have blood in their body. It's not going to matter. It's not going to matter whether their airway's open or they don't have any blood to carry that oxygen around. And then treat for shock as necessary. Again, it doesn't matter if they're breathing if their body is just killing itself trying to compensate for shock. It doesn't take long to treat for shock. You just put them on their back, like I said, elevate their legs up, try to keep them warm, put a blanket over them, whatever, and then you can immediately move on to. So once you've placed them onto their back, expose their chest. You know, use a knife, pair of scissors, whatever. Just get their chest bare, preferably. You know, you might not always be able to get their chest bare. It might be taking too long to try to rip their shirt off, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, any reservations you have, guys, about looking at someone kind of exposed, they need to go out the window as soon as. What's most important is doing right by whoever's down and getting everyone home safe. No matter whether you're looking at raw or unshaved chest or whatever. Exposing that chest is the most reliable way to check to see if their breathing is adequate. So once you have their chest exposed, you need to feel for their carotid pulse. And while you're doing that, you can look over at their chest and watch for their chest rising and falling. If their chest is rising and falling and it looks normal, great, they're probably breathing well. As long as you can't hear the breathing, keep in mind, normal breathing is quiet. If you hear them snoring, kind of gasping, anything like that, that's a sign that they're not breathing adequately. Adequate breathing is quiet. If you see their chest adequately rising and falling and you don't hear them breathing super loudly, that's good. That means that they're probably breathing well. But if there's any abnormality other than that, their chest rises and falls shallowly, or if you can hear them straining to breathe or even snoring, that's not good. That means that they've probably got an airway obstruction or their body is just not. So once you assess whether they're bleeding or breathing or not, so we'll kind of go through a couple of different scenarios or situations now, depending on what your findings with that is. So let's say that you find a pulse and they're visibly breathing adequately. Do not perform CPR. Support their airway and control any external bleeding that they might have. You know, they could be bleeding externally, but it's not traumatic, so you didn't treat that beforehand. So once you have that airway supported and you control any external bleeding, get them onto their side into that recovery position. So that way, if they do start to puke, mouth or whatever, they're not just going to start choking on that and then like their status is going to be. So let's say if when you did that initial assessment, you find a pulse, but there's no visible breathing. What you're going to do then is just do the rescue breaths. Deliver so if somebody has a pulse, but they're not breathing, deliver the rescue breaths at a rate of about deliver the breath over the course of a second every 5 seconds. So if they have a pulse but they're not breathing, deliver rescue breaths once every 5 seconds and blow the breath into their mouth over the course of a second. Don't be like, whoo, and like blow it all into their mouth at once. Deliver it kind of slowly over the course of a second, the entire breath. And if you practice it, you can kind of get a feel for how you need to do that to get their lungs inflated properly at a rate that's normal.
So just normally breathe.
You'll see when you practice it. Yeah, I mean it's kind of akin to normal breathing, but like trust me,
Okay.
when you get into these situations and stuff, your adrenaline's going to be pumping so high, and you're going to have so many different things going through your mind. You might mess something as simple as that up, and the best thing that you can practice and train. Where was I? So yeah, once you start delivering those rescue breaths, keep doing that. Don't stop. Don't stop until they start breathing on their own. Make sure that you're reassessing for that pulse to ensure that they continue to have it. Because if they're not breathing, their heart might stop beating pretty soon after, and then you...
Got it.
So, the third situation that you could run into is if you find no pulse and there's no breathing. Or you might find no pulse and they're breathing. So, but if that happens, their breathing is going to be very, very gaspy. It's going to be very labored. These are called agonal gasps. These are basically a last attempt from the brain to try and pull in as much oxygen as they can. And it's not adequate breathing. It's not agonal gasps are not adequate breathing. They don't have a pulse, but it looks like they're breathing. Start CPR, because that is not going to be adequate for them to survive. So, or like I said, they might not even be breathing at all, and they might have no pulse. So once you determine that there's no pulse, start performing CPR immediately. Preferably try to call another teammate over and have them perform rescue breaths while you're doing compressions. But like I was saying, you can yourself do both compressions and rescue breaths. Whether a teammate is helping you or not, it's always going to be the ratio of 30 compressions to 2. The reason why it's easier to have a teammate helping you is because they can hold that seal firmly and support the airway well, while not having to worry about switching off all the time to do compressions. And it makes everything a lot more efficient. Even if you have a teammate helping you, again, don't wait longer than 10 seconds for them to try to deliver rescue breaths. At this point, if there was a medic there, a medic would try to manually defibrillate somebody. Manual defibrillation is a little bit outside of your guys' scope of practice, so we won't get into that. What was I here? Okay, so while you're performing CPR, the patient might start regaining a pulse and start breathing on the... So you need to be vigilant while you're doing all this, or if there are signs of the patient regaining consciousness or having some form of spontaneous return of circulation. While you're doing CPR, if you see that they start to move on their own, if their eyes kind of start to flutter or twitch, or they start to breathe on their own, stop CPR and rescue breaths and check for a carotid pulse. Don't ever stop CPR or rescue breaths and to check for a pulse if they aren't exhibiting signs on their own of waking up or breathing. Does that make sense?
Roger that.
Yep.
Yeah, because even if they're not exhibiting signs of waking up on their own, but they are starting to wake up on their own and you're still doing CPR, it's not going to hurt them. It's more important to keep that CPR going just in the heart isn't going. So if they do regain circulation and breathing and all that and they are good, again, put them into that recovery position on their side with their head tilted downwards, just to make sure, because I guarantee you somebody is going to start puking up blood or just whatever they ate that morning once they wake up after CPR. Very stressful thing for the body. So let's say worst case scenario, you're performing CPR and they aren't waking back up. If you perform 10 rounds of CPR, 1 round being the 30 compressions and then 2 breaths, if you perform 10 rounds of that and no medic is available, circulation has not returned to them, or they haven't started breathing on their own, immediately evacuate the casualty at that point back to the nearest base, performing CPR on the way if possible. If you're doing a stretcher, you can do CPR on the way. You can have 2 people carrying the stretcher and 1 person on the side pumping that chest while you guys are going. If you don't have a stretcher available and you're having to do an extremity lift, you're not really going to be able to do CPR going on the way back like that. You know, depending on the situation, you might set them down, do a little bit of CPR just as an attempt to keep some oxygen going around in their body, but it just really depends on the situation. More than anything at that point, the best thing to do is try to get them back to the hospital so that would be hopefully defibrillated. All right. Well, that kind of concludes the scenario, kind of how you would go through it as a flow, putting it all together. Does anyone have any questions?
No, sir.
I have one.
Thank God for medics.
What's that, Kermanovich?
If an enemy's on the ground doing that stress breathing, you can kind of assume they're finished, huh?
Yeah, you can. If you hear them doing some extremely labored breathing, it'll sound like.
Yep. Heard it lots.
Yeah, it'll be like that.
Okay.
Yep, you can kind of assume they're done for.
Okay, just wanted to verify.
Yep. Any other questions? All right,
Negative.
sounds good. Well, that concludes the first aid portion of this class. If you guys ever have any other questions in the future, don't hesitate to ask any of the medics here. Be sure to help you out. Or if you guys ever want to practice any of this stuff, you can practice it on each other. Just be careful. Don't do chest compressions on each other because, like Cord asked and I mentioned, you can kind of hurt each other doing that. But you can kind of pretend like you're doing it on them. You know what I mean? So. Yeah, make sure you guys train and remediate on all this sort of stuff, and I'm sure that you'll end up saving someone's life out there. You know, being able to shoot well is important, but first aid is just as important as that, if not more important. So I'll turn it over to Hunter now for her logical part of this.
Today I am going to be talking about the mental well-being and the one important silent killer that I learned from being in the military was post-traumatic stress disorder. It shows its signs in many different ways to each individual. None of it is the same as the other. This also comes with a problem with it. Say one of your brothers or sisters has this condition, and they're out in the field and they either have a flashback or a mental breakdown. They become pretty much, they will not move, they will stand still, and it's very hard to get them to respond. I'm going to be teaching you how to handle that situation, how to bring them around safely and bring them back safely. As Green has touched on before, safety is the first thing you want to be aware of your surroundings. You don't want to go out there and get shot at. So, has anyone seen or known anyone that may have that post-traumatic stress disorder?
Possibly my father. But I think his manifests mostly a lack of sleep.
It does have that effect, lack of sleep, pretty much your well-being. It can also affect how you eat and drink. Sometimes a person can go without eating because something's triggered it. So, the best ways to deal with it is he's very supportive. That's one of the main keys. He's supportive. If you're not in danger and you're not in the field, and someone is having a mental breakdown, or what we call the mental shutdown, just be there. Be very patient, be calm, be relaxed. Try to keep things as normal as possible. And the other thing is, never pressure them to talk. The more you pressure, the more it tends to backfire with them. If they do decide to talk, listen. They may repeat the story again and again. It's a common thing with people with the traumatic disorder. They will repeat the story quite a lot. There's a few things you don't want to do though. And one of them is, if one of them's having a flashback or a mental shutdown, it's touching them. Do you know why you don't touch them?
You might get smacked in the face, especially if they're asleep.
That is very true. They can turn violent, and that is the last thing you want, is to have your brother or sister smack you in the gob because you touched them. So, if they're having that moment, say, "Can I touch you?" If they look at you and nod, place a gentle hand on them. It's kind of a reassurance. You're there for them, they can trust you, and they're safe with you. The other thing is, it's so easy to tell them, oh, don't worry, everything is fine. Just tell them it's okay. If you give them a simple answer, it's kind of like Green stated when someone is dying that they're not going to die. It's kind of the worst thing. You don't want to give them the same simple answer. You just want to say, everything will be okay. You keep it normal as possible. Another thing is, if you know someone that has it, encouragement. Empower them with their confidence and the good things they're good at. Say, like you, Kermanovich, you're really good at protecting the scribes. That, if you were suffering from it, would be my way of giving you the confidence to say, hey, you are really good at this.
Luckily, I realize that, but thank you. And understood.
Another thing is, learn triggers. Many things can trigger a flashback or a mental shutdown. Do you know types of triggers that can start this condition?
Glasses dropping on the ground.
Sound.
Loud noises.
Yep, sound, loud noises. But another thing is smell. Things they've seen. It can even be people that may have caused that can trigger that mental shutdown. So if they have you to trust as their key friend, they know they're gonna be safe. The other thing with it is sometimes this condition can incur, bring on pain. It can also bring on emotions, but it can also bring on health conditions. Sometimes a high rate heart rate, which can lead into a cardiac arrest. And it's something you do want to avoid at any cost, is causing them more stress. But if they're having a flashback, these are gonna help you bring them back, diffuse a situation that can become very violent very quick. First thing you want to do is ground them. Not literally push them to the ground. It basically means you're mentally grounding them to bring them back. Then you slowly remind them of their surroundings. But be very patient when you're doing this, because it can take some time to snap them out of the situation. Avoid sudden movements. If you move your hand quick, that could trigger them to be violent and smack you one. And we don't want that. And I'm sure as medics, we don't want you to come and say, yeah, he just punched me in the face because I moved too quick while he was having a mental shutdown. The most key thing you can do to support someone who is having a mental shutdown or having a flashback out in the field or where it's safe is to just stay calm. It does affect people in different ways, but the most key thing you can do is show trust, that they can trust you, that they can come to you. They can trust you if they're having a mental shutdown or having a flashback. It's the one thing that will help someone pull through. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Just real quick, we're about done over there.
Yep, I am wrapping up now.
All right, perfect.